You already know her face. The snakes where her hair should be, the eyes that turn living men to stone, the severed head a hero lifts like a trophy. For 3,000 years, Medusa has been the monster a hero was sent to kill. But that monster is a lie, the gods told to hide their own crime. Before the snakes, she was a young woman, a faithful priestess who was punished for something that was done to her. The creature everyone remembers isn't who she was, it is what they made her. So tonight you'll hear the real story, the one the heroes left out, how a devoted girl became the most feared creature in the ancient world, who decided that she deserved it, and why her face still ends up fixed to a goddess's shield, long after she is gone. If these are the kinds of stories you want more of, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely keeps this channel alive, and tell me in the comments which myth you want to hear next. Now, get comfortable. To understand what was taken from Medusa, we have to go back, long before the cave and the curse, to a quiet temple above the sea and the young woman who tended its flame. Her name was Medusa, and in the oldest tellings, she was the only mortal among 3 sisters. Where the other 2 had been born deathless and untouchable, Medusa could bleed, she could grow old, she could die. From the very beginning, she was the breakable one, and perhaps that is part of why the people of her city loved her the way they did, because she was beautiful in the way that mortal things are beautiful, briefly and completely. She lived within sight of the water, in a town of pale stone and salt wind, and travelers who passed through would speak of her long after they had gone. They remembered her voice, low and unhurried. They remembered the way she moved through a room. But most of all, they remembered her hair, dark and heavy and bright, the kind of hair that made strangers slow their steps in the street and forget, for a moment, where they had been going. Some whispered that it rivaled the beauty of the goddesses themselves, though Medusa would never have dared to say such a thing aloud. She thought her beauty a small and pleasant gift, no more important than a clear morning. She had no way of knowing that this same gift was the thing that would one day ruin her. When she was still young, Medusa gave her life to the goddess Athena, the gray-eyed mistress of wisdom and warcraft, the cool and deliberate mind of Olympus. To serve as her priestess was among the highest honors a mortal woman could be offered, and it asked a great deal in return, a vow of devotion, of purity, of a life turned wholly toward the goddess and away from the ordinary wants of the world. Medusa took that vow gladly, and she kept it. Her days began before the sun. While the town still slept and the sea lay flat and colorless in the dark, she would move through the cool of the temple, lighting the lamps one by one until the air turned gold and sweet with cedar smoke. She swept the marble. She polished the bronze until it caught the first gray light of dawn. And when the other priestesses woke, it was often her voice that led the morning hymn, steady and unhurried, a sound that made the great stone hall feel less like a building and more like something holding its breath. This was her whole world, and it was enough for her. Within those walls, she had found a kind of peace that most people never touch, a clear purpose, a place where she belonged, and the quiet, absolute certainty that the goddess she served would always keep her safe. She had given Athena everything. It never once occurred to her that the temple's high walls, raised to keep the noise of the world outside, might one day fail to keep out the very thing she needed protection from. The danger, when it came, did not come from the world of mortals. It came from the sea. Poseidon ruled that sea, brother to Zeus, lord of storm and earthquake, one of the 3 powers who had divided the universe between them. He was vast and old and long accustomed to wanting things, and more than that, he was accustomed to taking them, for a god of his rank, desire and possession had always been the same single motion. Somewhere along the shoreline, on a day that should have been like any other, his attention settled on Medusa. Perhaps he glimpsed her at a shrine above the water, her dark hair lifting in the wind off the waves. Perhaps his gaze simply reached through the temple walls, drawn to a beauty even the gods found rare. The old stories disagree on how he first saw her. They agree only on what followed, that the sea god washed her, that his interest hardened slowly into hunger, and that the hunger did not cool when she failed to return it. Because Medusa did refuse him. She was a priestess, sworn to purity, and she belonged to Athena and to no one else, and so, again and again, she turned the god away. For a mortal woman to refuse a god was an act of quiet, staggering courage. It was also, in the end, no protection at all. Poseidon was not a suitor who could be discouraged. He was a force of nature that had decided it was owed. What happened next is the hinge on which the whole story turns, and the older sources tell it plainly, without ever lingering on the cruelty of it. Poseidon followed her into the temple of Athena, into the one place on earth that should have been beyond any god's reach, the sacred heart of the goddess Medusa served. There, on that holy ground, he took her by force. She had fled to the temple believing it was a sanctuary. It was not. No bolt of divine anger fell to stop him. No goddess rose from her altar to defend the girl who had given her everything. And when it was over, Poseidon withdrew to his sea as easily as he had come, and the world did not so much as pause. Nothing happened to him. Nothing ever did. That was the unspoken law beneath all of these stories. The gods answered to no one, and least of all for what they took from mortals. A man might be punished for stealing a loaf of bread, but a god could break a life inside a temple and simply walk back into the waves, untouched and unbothered, already forgetting. But the temple had been defiled, and its goddess was Athena. When her fury finally came, it did not turn toward the sea, toward the brother she could not punish. It turned instead toward the girl who had survived him. Athena's punishment is the part of this myth that the myth itself seems ashamed of, and it is worth telling slowly because of how completely it turns our idea of justice inside out. The goddess did not hunt down Poseidon. She did not avenge the violation of her own temple upon the god who had committed it. Instead, she turned the full weight of her divine anger onto Medusa, onto the victim, onto the priestess who had been faithful to the very last, and she made of her an example. She began with the hair. The dark, bright hair that strangers had crossed cities to see. Athena twisted into a writhing crown of serpents. The face that had been lovely enough to catch the eye of a god, she made unbearable, so terrible that no living thing could look upon it and survive. From that moment on, anyone who met Medusa's gaze would harden in a single instant into cold gray stone. Consider what that curse actually does beneath the horror of it. It takes the very thing Medusa had been punished for, being seen, being wanted, and makes it lethal forever. Never again could she be looked at, never admired, never approached, never held. Her gaze, which is the most human way any of us has of reaching toward another person, was remade into a weapon she could never put down. Some of the old writers called it jealousy. Others called it the cold logic of a goddess guarding her honor. But strip away the reasons, and the same hard shape always remains underneath. A woman was assaulted, and a goddess answered by turning the woman into a monster. And so Medusa became the creature we remember. Driven from the temple and cut off from the company of every living thing, she made her way to the far edge of the world, a bleak shore at the rim of the ocean, where the sun hung low and weak and the wind never stopped. Here, the old stories slip in a detail that is easy to miss and unbearable once you have seen it. Over the years, her new home began to fill with statues. Figures of men stood scattered across the rocks in the broken ground, frozen mid-stride, mid-reach, some with their arms still raised. They had not been carved. They were the ones who had come for her, heroes hunting glory, treasure seekers, the merely curious, and every one of them had met her eyes, and every one of them was still there, held in stone for as long as the stone would last. Picture the life of that. The only company left to her was the company of men who had come to kill her, turned to rock the instant they saw her face. She could not look upon her own immortal sisters without risking the same. She could not weep to anyone, could not be touched, could not be comforted. Whatever Medusa had once been, the faithful girl, the beloved priestess, lay buried now beneath scales and silence, alone at the end of the earth with a crown of serpents and a yard full of the dead. And then, one gray morning, something new came across the water toward her. A young man carrying a polished shield and a plan. His name was Perseus, and he had not chosen any of this. He was a son of Zeus and a mortal woman, and he had been maneuvered into an impossible promise by a king who wanted him gone, a king who desired Perseus' mother and saw the young man as the one obstacle standing in his way. So the king demanded a gift that no one could survive collecting, the head of Medusa. It was a death sentence dressed up as an errand, because no one who went hunting the gorgon had ever come home. But Perseus did not go alone. The gods themselves equipped him for the hunt. From Hermes, he received a pair of winged sandals so that he might cross the world by air. From Hades came a helm that swallowed its wearer into invisibility. He was handed a curved blade, keen enough to cut through anything. And the final gift came from a familiar source, from Athena, the very goddess whose anger had made Medusa a monster in the first place. Athena gave him a shield of bronze, polished bright as a mirror. Think, for a moment, about what that means. The goddess who had cursed the girl now armed the man who would end her, and the tool she chose was precise and merciless, a mirror, so that Perseus would never have to look Medusa in the eye, so that even at the very end, no one would ever have to truly see her, not as a monster and certainly not as a woman. He could kill her the way a person kills a reflection. Guided by the gods, Perseus flew to the edge of the world. And there, among the silent statues, he found her at last, asleep. The heroic version of this story is proud of what comes next. It should not be. Perseus did not face Medusa, and he did not fight her. Watching only her reflection in Athena's mirrored shield, so that her deadly gaze could never find his, he crept across the rocks to the place where she lay sleeping, a woman who had been violated and cursed and banished to the loneliest corner of the world. And while she slept there, defenseless, he raised the curved blade and struck off her head. What rose from the wound, the myth treats as a wonder. Out of her blood sprang two strange children, a great winged horse named Pegasus and a giant with a golden blade. They were Poseidon's offspring. All this time, through the curse, through the long exile, through every silent year among the statues, Medusa had been carrying them since that day in the temple. Her death was the only door through which they would ever enter the world. Even in her ending, she was made to give something to the god who had wronged her. Perseus sealed the head inside a bag, careful never to glance at it, because the curse had not died when she did. Even severed, even still, those eyes turned the living to stone. Whatever else had been stripped from Medusa, that terrible power remained, and Perseus had crossed the whole world precisely so that he could use it. Medusa was dead, but her story was not finished, because her face was simply too useful to bury. Perseus carried the head with him across the world, and he used it. When his enemies closed in around him, he would raise it and turn them to stone with the face of the woman the gods had ruined. He used her in death exactly as she had been used in life, as an object, as a means to someone else's end. With her gaze, he turned a cruel king to stone, and a sea monster sent to devour an innocent girl, and even the Titan Atlas, whose petrified body is said to have become the mountain range that still carries his name. And when at last Perseus had no more need of her, he gave the head away to Athena. The goddess took the face of the girl she had cursed and fixed it to the center of her own shield, and there Medusa stayed. The serpents, the staring eyes, the frozen mouth, carried into every battle the goddess would ever fight for the rest of time. So consider where Medusa finally comes to rest. Not free, not avenged, not even granted the small mercy of being forgotten. She was mounted on the shield of the goddess who destroyed her, locked inside the monstrous face she never asked for, and made to serve as a warning and a weapon for the very powers that had broken her. Useful, always useful, even now. For 3,000 years, we have told her story backwards. We remember the cave and the snakes and the hero brave enough to kill the thing inside it. We remember Medusa as the danger and Perseus as the answer to her. But the older story, the one lying underneath the one we inherited, remembers something quieter and far harder to forgive. It remembers a faithful girl who was wronged by one god, punished by another, and then blamed by everyone who came after for the crime that had been done to her. There was a reason her face ended up carved over doorways and stamped onto armor and amulets all across the ancient world. People believed the gorgon stare could turn away evil, that the very thing which had made her a monster could be set to stand guard. It is a strange and bitter kind of afterlife, the wronged woman, remade into protection for everyone except herself. And maybe that is the truest place to leave her. Not as the monster in the dark, and not only as the victim of the gods, but as a face that has outlasted all of them: Poseidon, Athena, Perseus, every king and hero who ever used her, still staring out of the stone, still daring the world, at long last, to actually look at her. And to remember who she was, before they decided what she would become. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.